Okay, well, welcome to class, Earth and Issues in Environmental Science for the 10th of September. I'm going to share my screen now. Looks like we have about 55 people attending. Hopefully the others will show up. So our activities for today, I'm going to lecture for about 20 minutes or so on the future value of renewable resources. This is something that you discussed in class on Tuesday. And to look at this in more detail, I'm going to look at a history of logging and deforestation in the United States. And I'll be paying particular attention to a case study of the Headwaters redwood forest in California and how that the management of that forest played out against various market forces due to capital investment in the area. And then we'll have a breakout session, and what I'd like the class to do in this breakout session, or the individual teams to do, is to have a discussion of milestone 1. Milestone 1 is due on the 13th, so over the weekend, all the teams will need to complete the assignment for milestone 1. So in the breakout sessions, I'd like you to look at that, and as we break out, I will go over what the requirements for milestone 1 are. And so you'll have about 20-25 minutes in the breakout sessions, and Carrie and I, to the extent that we're able, will be visiting the different classrooms. When we return, in the main session, I'm going to be calling on each on each team in turn, and ask each team to make a brief presentation of what they think their topic is going to be for their class project, for their term project. Okay. Before I do that, are there any questions over where we're at now, or material that was covered last Tuesday? Anyone who has a question should please unmute their microphone and unmute their camera and go ahead and ask a question. It's hard for me to tell, but questions? Okay, no questions. So we left off yesterday, or left out Tuesday rather, talking about one of the factors that drive wealth inequality in the United States. And we pointed out that there is huge and growing inequality, and that the inequality is not equally distributed, that some groups they have a wider gap between the wealth that they hold and the wealth that's held by a small portion of US population. And one of the factors in this indebtedness and this disparity in wealth is student debt. Student debt is a very, very large component of the total indebtedness of people in the United States. And so we presented this, and one of the points was that, this is an issue in driving inequality. But there's another issue in all this, which is, why are people willing to take on these high levels of debt, knowing that this is going to hamper their economic development going forward? So what is the reason for this? And the reason for this is a sense of the future value of the investment that individuals make by choosing to borrow money to support their higher education. Just skip over this. So the question is, how much is the future worth? And value is going to depend on need. As an individual, you say, well, I'm going to be willing to invest and take on tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, because I think that the value of what I obtain for that investment is going to go up over time. And that's an assumption which is challenged by current employment trends and by downturns in the economy. Nonetheless, it is a factor in how people consider what the future is, what the value of future investments is going to be. And one of the things that I asked you to consider on Tuesday in the discussion was, are there examples of renewable resources that are worth a great deal at one period, but then as we go forward, the value of that resource changes, and so the perception of what a resource is and what that value will be changes over time. And I think that we can see this if we look at a history of logging in the United States and a history of forestation in the United States. So that's what I'd like to do here. And we're going to keep in mind that this sort of history plays into this concept of the tragedy of the commons. And you've read about the tragedy of commons, you probably heard about it before, but specifically in the textbook, it's described as what happens when a resource is held in common, but that people are allowed to make investments or extract value from this resource over time, and sort of what happens if individual choices about how to extract from a resource start to overwhelm the renewability of that resource. And the example was the example of commons, grazing commons, which were a widespread feature of village life, city life in the past. And so during the colonial times, it would be very usual for a village to have a common area where people could graze livestock, horses, sheep, and so forth. The idea is that everybody's free to do this, and as long as everybody is measured in how they make use of this resource, then the resource can continue in perpetuity to be a valuable resource for the community. However, if somebody gets the idea that they can over extract from that, if they can have, run a flock of sheep into the common grazing area, then this will deplete the grass resources, and the entire community loses the value of this resource, and that value is deferred or conferred to the individuals who choose to overexploit it. And Garrett Hardin, who's the one who sort of came up with this and formulated the term tragedy of the commons, took a very pessimistic view of what the typical choices would be. And he was quite political in his views, and he kind of thought that capitalism, market capitalism in particular, was going to tend to drive community-held resources into decline, potential extinction, that this was an inevitability built into capitalism. And I want to, explore this by looking at some examples. And I think that in the United States, given the unexploited nature of the Americas, or relatively unexploited nature of the Americas, when European colonists began arriving in the 1600s and thereabouts, I think that the history of forest land in the United States is particularly revealing in this sense. So you've seen in the book that that there was this frontier attitude toward the resources that were available in the U.S. And this is a slide from or image from the book. And the book suggests that historically this frontier attitude dominated, from the founding of the United States, establishment of Jamestown, some of the earliest colonies, all the way through the establishment of the United States, the Revolution, and into the mid 18th century or 19th century. And they give the example of clear cutting as an example of this. Well, I think that that this frontier attitude and the sort of hard line that they draw here in the middle of the 1800s can be a bit misleading, and I think that the frontier attitude has persisted well into the 1900s. And indeed, it's part of the way in which we manage resources even today. So let's look at this in a little more detail. What I'm showing you here is a picture of a climax community of longleaf pine. Longleaf pine was the dominant forest type throughout Louisiana, Mississippi, northern Florida, Alabama, and longleaf pine forests, were a climax ecosystem. In other words, that was sort of the end state of forest development. These are large, slow-growing trees, and they have a number of different values. The timber itself is valuable. However, the way in which longleaf pine was exploited initially was for turpentine. And you see these marks on the tree here. These are injuries that are deliberately caused by turpentiners, and the trees will produce a sap that whenever there's a cut or a break in the bark and the outer cambium of the tree. And so this sap oozes out and flows down, and turpentiners would collect this sap and then refine it, boil it, and reduce it to make turpentine. And the sap and the pitch from longleaf pine were a very important product for preserving trees against losses to insect pests and other forms of rot and fungus. So turpentining was a major industry throughout Florida and Alabama, Mississippi. An important source of revenue in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Starting in about 1905, the forests in the northeastern United States have been largely depleted and clear-cut, and I'll show you some examples of the history of that shortly. And so a lot of the loggers and logging companies that had been active in the Northeast moved to the South and began cutting down the virgin forests of longleaf pine. And this produced huge amounts of lumber. This is a picture taken in 1905 in Gulfport, Mississippi. And Gulfport was established in 1898, 1895, something like that. And it was established as a port from which timber, specifically longleaf pine, could be harvested. And you get a sense, using this individual as a scale, of how large these trees were in their original old growth forest state. So billions of billions of board feet of lumber were harvested and felled across Mississippi, Alabama, and North Florida. And they were floated down in rivers and then packaged up and sawn up and shipped out for use all around the world and all around the United States. However, this practice was, the logging practices, as they became more and more industrialized, were very destructive to the forest and prevented regrowth and reestablishment. So there was a use of renewable resources, very extractive, which didn't allow for the renewal to take place. And there are many things that contributed to this. One of them was this sort of practice of drag lining or skidding. And so they would build train tracks into the forest area, and the locomotives would come in, and then they would, using steam power, they'd run cables out, to up to 1,000 feet of cable in all directions. And when trees were cut down, they'd be cut into smaller lengths, and the logs would be dragged using these winches and cables back to the central point, and they'd be put on these trains and carried down either to rivers to float them down or all the way to Gulfport and other ports and shipped out. Now, the problem with this is that this dragging of large trees over small trees was very destructive to the ground cover. It tended to stop the young saplings that could have renewed the forest from coming back. And so as a result, this sort of clear cutting and this destructive practice of forestry, by the mid-1920s and by 1930, had completely depleted the virgin forests of Mississippi, and Gulfport fell into decline starting in the mid-1920s, and that decline continued through the Depression. It's only in the last 50 years or so that Gulfport has sort of recovered from this boom and bust cycle that resulted from the exploiting these timber resources and then over exploiting it to the point where the resource that had supported the community had been completely depleted, and they had to switch to other forms of industry like riverboat gambling and that sort of thing. Well, this deforestation, played out across the United States, and what I'm showing you here is a series of maps, and this reflects the history that I'm just saying. So this is the map on the right here is the cover of virgin forests. In other words, forests that had achieved a climax state. And we'll be talking more about climax forests and forest succession in later lectures. But so these are unexploited forests. So starting in 1620, the establishment of Jamestown, a great deal of the United States, over 50%, was covered with these quote unquote virgin forests. Now it's a bit deceptive because the indigenous folks here actually practiced various forms of forest management, including burning. Native Americans would deliberately set fires in forest areas to manipulate the production of game, to drive game, hunted animals, and to make it easier for them to capture, and also to promote a certain type of forest. So it's not really fair to call these forests virgin or unexploited, because Native Americans had various practices that did in fact manipulate the kind of forest cover that we had. However, when European settlers came, they came from Europe, and in Europe by 1600 had almost completely been deforested. So that the Europeans had overexploited forest resources, wood being a very important resource in that period. And so when they started arriving in the North American continent, the availability of timber was a major driver. Indeed, the discovery of North America by Leif Erikson and others may have been driven by the need of colonies in Greenland and Iceland to obtain lumber from somewhere else. And so that may have been an original component motivating settlement and expansion. By 1850, you can see that the forests are being heavily depleted in the Northeast, and then this is the period that I described, starting at about 1850. The southern forests were also heavily depleted, and so by 1920, the period that we were talking about previously, most of the quote-unquote virgin forests had been chopped down, burned up, used for a variety of industries. Sort of globally, you can see that there's been a major change in the amount of forest area, and there's been a shift between temperate forests and tropical forests, and we'll talk about tropical forests when we look at global ecotomes later on in the course. But you can see that initially temperate forests were a major feature of the northern ecosystems, and this began to shift. And then by 1950, the prevalence had switched over to tropical forests. And in the present day, a lot of the forest area consists of tropical forests. So most of the majority of forest cover globally is represented by tropical forests. And this shift, this loss of forest cover, is a major feature and a major trend in the global ecosystem changes and impacts of climate change, and resource exploitation by human communities. And so this would be a rich topic area if a team was looking for a subject for its class project. Okay, so that's a brief history here. Of course, history doesn't stop, and if you look at forest cover in the present day, this is a map from USGS, EPA, and it shows that in present day there is quite a bit of second growth or third growth forest covering the US. And in fact, in some areas, there is more forest cover now than there was in earlier portion of the century. So a lot of the forests that were cut down have in fact regrown. And so there is a lot of forest cover. A lot of the forests, however, that have regrown are cultivated forests, and these are forests that are specifically planted, with one or two tree species. The tree species are widely spaced, and so essentially they are giant tree farms. They produce lumber, and they produce lumber efficiently, but the ecosystems that's supported by forest growth are really greatly shifted, and so you don't get a lot of the ecologic benefits in terms of biodiversity and other factors that a natural forest would provide, even though it continues to produce timber. Well, I want to look at a specific case study, which brings a lot of these issues to the front, and I want to look specifically at redwood forests in the California and the Pacific Northwest. So redwoods, I don't know how many people have seen redwood forests. Hopefully a lot of you. They're really an amazing component of the global ecosystem. They're one of the largest and oldest tree species on Earth. Specimens have been dated, fossil specimens have been dated to Jurassic time, so 200 to 150 million years ago. There were already redwood type trees growing in North America and elsewhere. So they've evolved, and they're literally a tree that dinosaurs would have walked under, which is kind of an awesome thought. The largest species in the subfamily Sequoiae were widespread in California. There are also related species in Chile, which are quite large, and in China, the related species are smaller. But they're still in the subfamily. The broader relatedness of redwoods, they're in the same general group as cypress trees. So this fibrous bark, high straight stems. I know this is a sort of a typical characteristic of redwoods and this variety of conifers. Redwoods in particular can live for more than 1,000 years, and the lumber is very valuable because, like cypress, cedar, redwood wood is very resistant to bacterial and fungal rot, and so that makes it valuable for many types of use. And a single large redwood tree can be worth as much as $20,000. So there's a huge value to a standing tree, and that value can be harvested in immediate terms if it's cut down and chopped up into lumber, and that lumber is sold. And so, but because the trees live so long and take such a long time to reach harvestable size, the exploitation of redwoods is a special challenge. So let's look a little bit at the history of that. And here are some of the trees. This is looking at a particular large specimen of tree. This is from Stout Grove in California, one of the preserves, redwood preserves, where some of the largest specimens of redwood trees that exist are still growing. And so this particular tree is about 1,500 years old. It's 286 feet high, more or less, diameter of 24 feet, so a very large tree if you think about that, and an estimated age of about 1,500 years. Stout Grove is, if you look up at this, you see that the redwoods are dominating the forest canopy. So they've outgrown everything else, and their leaves are blocking the sunlight, making it difficult for other trees to grow up underneath. Another factor that promotes this sort of climax community among redwoods is the tendency or the ability of redwoods to resist fire. And so the understory, and you know, if it's managed naturally, you know, tends to be controlled both by the fact that the canopy height is so high and so effectively blocks sunlight, and also that the understory in redwood forests will periodically catch fire and burn away. But the redwoods, with their thick bark and the fact that most of their leaf cover is pretty high up in the canopy, can resist these fires. And so the fire comes in and sweeps out and cleans out this understory and allows the trees, the redwood trees, to continue. And of course, you know, the age of these trees is, you know, is really pretty impressive. And so here's a specimen that fell over in 1930, and this is a tree that's about 1,000 years in age. So this individual tree, you know, was present for the, you know, European settlement of, you know, the original European settlement in North America. You know, Columbus, the arrival of Columbus, the Declaration of Independence, you know, California Gold Rush, all the way up into 1930. And there are trees, as I showed you, that are still alive today that have even a longer history. So it's a pretty awesome thing to contemplate, you know, these trees, which are, you know, have such a great antiquity in terms of when they evolved originally, and such a long lifespan as individual specimens. Well, okay, so let's look at the history then in California. In, you know, 1800, there were you know, about 2 million acres of redwood forest across the United States. I'm sorry, across Northern California. But you know, this was a very valuable tree type, and just like in the Mississippi and the southern U.S., there was great logging interests, and so logging, you know, was a huge component of the economic value that allowed the West to be settled and exploited and expanded. So redwood, you know, was the timber from redwood and other related large conifers, you know, was the raw material which built a lot of the structures in historic California. So if you go forward from 1800 to 1996, there was a huge, you know, most of the redwood forests had been logged or cut down. There were a few preserves, famously Muir Woods in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then more redwoods along the coast. And this particular area in Headwaters Forest, which is near Humboldt, California. So, you know, over 96% of the coastal redwood have been converted, not just by logging, but also converted to cattle ranches and what they're calling fiber plantations, which are these cultivated forests. There were some companies that tried to maintain or tried to log in a sustainable way. And an example of this was the company Pacific Lumber. So Pacific Lumber was a family-owned business, but you know, in order to expand their capital, they offered they went public, and so they offered their shares on the market, and they became a publicly traded company. So, but by 1986, Pacific Lumber's old growth trees had become extremely valuable. So they had this forest land, and they had maintained this, and they were trying to harvest it in a sustainable way. But what happened was that the value of their unexploited trees greatly exceeded the value of the stock and other material that the company held and traded. And so a company called Maxim came along and leveraged $750 million in junk bonds to buy out Pacific Lumber and take over its board of directors. In other words, it was a market takeover, a hostile takeover, financed by what were then called junk bonds. So the Maxim company borrowed very heavily. It used that borrowed money to buy all the shares essentially in Pacific Lumber, and then take over its board of directors and completely change the way it was harvesting the redwoods. So, they, instead of selectively cutting and trying to harvest in a sustainable way, they started a practice of clear cutting and doubling or even tripling the former rate of cut. By now, flash forward to the late end of the 20th century, there were only 6 groves of redwoods remaining, and a lot of those were in the headwater forests. So, the corporate plan of Maxim all along was not to sustainably harvest redwoods, but to maximize their profit over the shortest period of time. And eventually, Maxim, clear cut, and the money was extracted from the company and went into other interests, and Maxim declared bankruptcy. So Pacific Lumber was shouldered with over $700 million in debt. In other words, they bought, Maxim borrowed all this money, bought the company, and then the company had to take over that debt, and eventually they declared bankruptcy. So the Maxim stock was worth $57 a share in 1900, and it's worth 0 today. So the practice of clear cutting is destructive in many ways. It's destructive, of course, of the trees, the forest cover, and the animals and plants that depend on that. It's also very destructive of the land, because a climax forest maintains the soil and stops it washing away. So here's an example of this, very steep area that's been clear cut, and you can see that not only is the tree cover gone, but there's very little plant cover at all, because the soil has begun to wash away along these roads. So the practice of clear cutting is, not only stops the forest from recovering, but can be very destructive, can cause landslides and flooding and other issues. Well, the practice of the willingness of Maxim to overexploit this resource, which they had acquired by hostile takeover, was resisted by popular demonstrations. And so there were very widespread demonstrations in California to try to stop the timber industry. And this, you're kind of familiar now with how these demonstrations go. Some of them were legal and peaceful, but there were also violent conflicts between the police, between loggers and demonstrators. And the demonstrators were depicted as being wild-eyed environmentalists. And they did do things like, in this case, they there were tree sitters who would find a particularly large tree, and they would climb up the tree and sit in it. And the idea being that if the loggers came and tried to cut the tree down, they would cause injury to the people that were occupying the tree. And so some trees, were occupied by tree sitters for up to more than a year. And they were supplied by, sort of a guerrilla bands who would come in and, give people food and water, etc. Well, this worked and it didn't work. There was some resistance to Maxim, but overall, the company went ahead and did clear cut large areas of the headwaters forests. But the story didn't end there. After about, starting in about 2000, the Bureau of the Interior took over the remaining redwood area and has begun restoring it. And so the restoration of the headwaters forest, has proceeded, and you can find old growth redwoods still existing in these areas. And so I think this is an example of a history in which the value of the trees has changed over time. And now the sort of prevailing value is that these redwood forests should be preserved as areas of recreation, as areas of biodiversity, and of areas that are preserving, that act to preserve environmental values. Okay, so is there any discussion or thoughts about this topic? Stop sharing. Any questions or reactions to the discussion of logging and forest exploitation? How does this relate to present day practices? Can you think of any issues in the present day where forests and tree cover and how forests are managed are playing out? Any examples that you can think of?
The Amazon?
Certainly the Amazon, that's an excellent example. You know, the Amazon is being deforested. The people that live in the Amazon are being displaced. And this is a very political movement. President of Brazil, Bolsonaro, is very pro-development of the Amazon. And you know, so there is a major loss of forest cover in the Amazon. What about the United States? Are there anything that's happening now, you know, right now, where forest management and the decisions that are made about forest management, you know, have a major societal importance?
The fires in Oregon and California.
The fires, and I was hoping somebody would bring that up. Yeah, and so, you know, one of the things, you know, sort of reveals the kind of complexity of, you know, trying sustainably to manage renewable resources. So to preserve forests and to allow for human habitation of forested areas, fire has been suppressed across a lot of forest areas. And so that natural process that I talked about for the redwoods, where periodic fires would come through and consume the fuel that was formed by smaller trees, and would allow the larger trees to continue. Well, that was suppressed for, you know, many decades, and as a consequence, a lot of that fuel is now burning. And there are other features that come into this. There are insect infestations, which have killed, you know, large areas of forest, and the dead trees are then a huge fuel source. Drought has also killed a lot of trees across the West, and these dead trees, this dead standing wood, is now susceptible to fire. And so, you know, we have an acute problem in forest management, and due to the potential for fire across the U.S. So again, I'm offering this as something which would be a rich topic for any team that would like to present this. So are there any other questions? If not, I'm going to put you into your breakout groups. But let me just, before I do that, let me just share the screen here. So what you're after doing here is to work on Team Project Milestone 1. So the assignment for Milestone 1, which is due on the 13th, is for each team to choose a topic for their project. For this milestone, you have to choose a topic, either from the list of topics that I've provided, or you can develop your own ideas. And the topic choices need to be unique for each team. So I don't want multiple teams, you know, doing research on coral reefs, for example. Every team should try to develop their own independent and separate research topics. I'm going to grade this, or Carrie and I will grade this milestone. That's worth a total of 25 points. And there are some criteria for grading. So I want the choice of topics to reflect scientific and scholarly rigor. And what I mean by this is that this is you should try to be ambitious in the way that you choose your topic, research your topic, and present your topic. So this is not a sort of show and tell, about coral reefs or dolphins. It has to really dig into the scientific problems. So the topics should be specific, and they should reflect a part of a broad scientific investigation of a particular area. And you should also consider the societal relevance of the topic. In other words, if you're doing a research on forest or Amazon, you can bring out the way in which this is important for society. The other thing I'd like to look at in this topic is you should consider, as you're scoping your topic, what the available sources, both from the scientific literature and the popular literature, should be. And you don't have to come up with an exhaustive list at this point at all, but you should indicate in your description of your topic, where you're going to be doing your research, both from the scientific literature, but also from the popular literature. And if there are, multimedia type examples of things that are available, YouTube videos, other sorts of presentations, that's a plus. That's a good thing, because that will enhance your presentation and your report. And so then what you're going to be handing in is a paragraph outlining the proposal. And these paragraphs are what we're going to be evaluating. So in your paragraph, you should explain what your topic is. You should indicate where the research is coming from. And you should write all this up in a way that's grammatically correct. It's describing what's going on. Okay, so I'll put you in your breakout rooms now. Before I do that, are there any questions about Team Project Milestone 1?
I have a question. How will we know if another team, chose a topic before us?
Well, we're going to be coming back and presenting everything. And don't worry if you choose something that somebody else is. If there's some overlap, then both teams will have to sort of refine their area so that you can get independent areas. So I'll be letting you know, and Carrie will be letting you know, the degree to which there's an overlap.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. And if you don't end up in a breakout room, let me know. So I'll just go down the list of people who are not in breakout rooms. So if you haven't gone in, what room are you in? So Whitney, what group are you supposed to be in?
Green machine.
Green machine. Are you registered? You keep showing up as a guest.
I am registered, so my Zoom account was linked to my old employee email, but they updated my employee email. So I get the message that I am confirmed in your class, but my Zoom account is an older email.
Okay, if you can fix that, that would be good. Anyway, I'll put you in your room now. So
Dalia is, oh, sorry, I'm in Planeteers.
who's talking?
Dalia.
Yeah, you're in Planeteers?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Carolina. I'm also in Planeteers.
Okay. And Darren?
Aquatic Junkies.
Aquatic Junkies. Are you registered, Darren?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know why you don't go. Emily, Catherine Zollner, what are you in?
I'm in group 14, the Wayfinders.
Who said they're in Wayfinders? Because
Emily, me.
Emily. Oh, okay. And Catherine, you're muted. So there you go.
I'm in group 6, title team.
All right. And Kate Wrights, what are you in?
I'm also in team 6, title team.
Okay. And Carrie O'Reilly, where would you like to be? Carrie, are you here?
Yeah, wherever you want to put me.
Okay, so were you able to move last time around, or?
No.
All right. All right, well, I'm gonna put you in, I guess, only clams. And can you like send me a text or something when you're ready to move?
Okay, yeah, I can do that.
Because it doesn't work to try to assign you to all of the different teams. It won't let me do that. So
Yeah, that's weird. That's what everything has been saying to do.
yeah, but it
I'll have to.
totally doesn't work. Who's okay? Well, who did you talk to that said that? Because
I had just joined FSU's IT chat room thing, and they said you should be able to assign me to all rooms.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Okay, well, I'll try getting on there and see if we can figure this out. All right, so I'll put you in, and
Okay.
and then I'll put you into Wayfinders next, and so forth.
Sounds good.
So Elise, what room are you in, please?
Beach, please.
Beach, please.
I just lost connection.
Oh, okay.
Anything specific you guys would rather do? How are we doing?
How are you doing? You got some ideas?
We're bouncing ideas back and forth here.
Okay. I don't see them. Are they moving around? Or?
We probably can't do anything coral reef this year.
Okay.
That's as far as we've gotten so far.
All right. I mean, there's lots of topics. So what do you have any ideas, or what's
if we were going to say do something like tourism, how would we break that down to present about it? Like, would we pick something more specific, like within Florida, or maybe like around a certain type of tourism, like environmental tourism?
You could certainly do environmental or ecotourism. That's people have reported on that in the past. That's been a project. So you can do that. But as you do that, so that's a great idea. But then you should look in like your Web of Science and just to try to get a sense of how much literature is going to be available on tourism. And when you do that, you'll see that not everything is described. So there may not be many scientific studies of ecotourism in coral reefs, but there will be other things, and so you can use that research to refine your overall topic.
Okay. What was one topic, like, I'm trying to remember some of the topics from like last semester, but what was one topic that you kind of liked that you've seen teams in the past do?
I think agriculture is a great topic. Sort of the environmental impact of renewable power, for example.
Okay.
That's a sort of an interesting topic. Have you looked at that list? I put a list on the.
Yeah, that's what we were looking at the list, but I was just trying to think of. We're just trying to, like I said, bouncing ideas. So I was trying to see what you would say and kind of work from there. So.
Okay. Right. Well, keep bouncing, and you'll be called on in a few minutes to give a preliminary idea anyway. All
okay,
right?
Will do.
It's like something that there's like a lot of trapped nutrients or like whatever. I'm not a scientist, but the point is that it's interesting. So like if somebody else snatches like the garbage patch thing, we could always look into that.
Mm-hmm.
So garbage
We've
patch.
been joined.
Hi. Yeah, well, plastics in the ocean, that's a major topic. A lot of people have worked on that. That's sort of something that I think I would anticipate there'd be a number of people, looking at it. So you can, you can try to break it down in a couple of different ways, if that's what you want to do. So one area to explore would be, sort of the oceanography around the garbage patch. Another would be sort of plastic pollution generally, not just in the ocean, but what steps are being taken to try to mitigate plastics pollution. It's, if you think about
what species actually survive in and amongst the plastics would be kind of an interesting topic, because I know a lot of creatures use it as a, as cover and protection, and then from predators.
Okay, well, that's something you have to find some results on that.
Yeah.
So, so the widespread dispersion of plastics, the impact of plastics on the environment more generally, plastics in the ocean, those are all areas that you could certainly.
Yeah, we were thinking about maybe focusing in on a specific garbage patch, the Indian Ocean garbage patch.
Okay.
And just focusing on that, and then where it goes, is it all just remain in the Indian Ocean, or where does it spread to worldwide?
Okay.
We had that idea floating around. And Penelope had a thought you might be able to answer for.
Yeah. I heard like a podcast about this like area. I don't know if it's like on one of the poles, like North Pole or South Pole, of like this area that has like really old frozen, I think it's like plants or something that's slowly decaying. Like since global warming's happening, they're like.
Oh, yeah. I know exactly.
What is that called?
Well, it's the taiga, and there's a term for it, which I'm not remembering, but it's permafrost.
Permafrost.
And melting of the permafrost is releasing methane.
Yeah.
Methane is a really important greenhouse gas. So that's a great topic. You'll find a lot of literature on that. And it's also a huge threat, because the amount of carbon and greenhouse gases that are locked up right now in the permafrost is gigantic. It's like 50 teragrams of carbon, which is a huge number. And so, as that melts, there's a sort of a positive feedback. So it creates more greenhouse effect, which accelerates the melting, which creates more greenhouse effect. So it's one of these real, kind of doomsday things. So that's a great topic. And I know you'll find a lot of literature on that. And one of our professors here at FSU in EOS, Dr. Spencer, he and his students work on that specific topic. So you could talk to some of your classmates or students that could help you out with that.
Is he doing research on that?
Yeah, well, he looks at carbon fluxes from rivers. And some of the rivers are glacial, so he works both in the Arctic, in Alaska, and also in the tropics. But he's part of that research. There's others that are doing it. So that's a real rich area.
After class, can I stay a little bit so you can give me his email just to like talk to him?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Or just email me and I'll send it.
Email. Okay. Thank
All right,
you.
I'm gonna go to another group now. So.
All right.
How's it going, homeboys?
Good.
Got any ideas?
So I think the topic that we're going to do is microplastics in the ocean and ways that it affects the different ecosystems as well as humans.
Okay, there's a lot of literature on microplastics. There's also a lot of interest. So there may be other groups that are interested on this. And so if there is somebody else who's working on microplastics, you might have to negotiate to make sure that you cover separate areas. But okay, that's a good one. All right, I got to move around here, but I'll see you back in the main session in about 8 minutes.
Awesome, thank you.
Is there something
and particularly Miami, we can talk about like the insurance market and how it like disproportionately affects people. Again, just throwing more ideas out there.
I mean, even if we,
Hi, Ticklix. How's it going?
It's going all right.
Doing good. We're
throwing
just,
ideas
like,
around.
Okay. Well, you don't have to like finalize it. You can also just talk about it. But so we'll be back together in about 5 minutes or so. So sort of have a couple of topics. And what I want to do when we get back together is to see how much overlap there is between topics people are choosing. Okay.
Okay.
What's your preliminary ideas, or what topics have you thought about?
So the topic from the list we all agreed on, like we made a document and we kind of put our names by the things we would be most interested in. And the topic that got the most votes is coastal management and sea level rise.
Okay.
And we wanted to like put it more specifically to our topic being Florida sea level rise and management tactics that we're using to stunt the sea level rise.
Good choice. Lots of diversity of ideas, lots of ways to present that. So I think that's a good one. All right, I gotta go. So, but hang in there.
Thank you.
Zane, do you need to be? Zane, do you need to be put somewhere? Zane Messingale?
Yes, please. Can I be put with group 9? My wife I just cut. I was just with them.
What group is that?
Group 9. It's Green Machine. Thank you. Types of algae that can also cause it, like in other parts of the world. It's just the ones that are like heavily affecting Florida right now are those.
Got it.
Fantastic. Fern, on your Can't Fathom. So Can't Fathom, how's it going?
It's going well.
You got a preliminary topic. We're going to be back together in just a few minutes. So
Yeah, we do actually. We're
Great.
going to be talking about the saltwater harmful algae blooms around Florida.
Harmful algal blooms. Great idea. Lots and lots of literature and lots of popular stuff as well. So you can look at that.
Yeah, that's kind of why we picked it.
And a scientific point of view. All right, let me go someplace else.
All right.
Free. I just kind of tried to get it all into sentences. But I think I touched on everything he wants.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Hello.
We're going to be back together in just a minute or so. Have you got a preliminary topic? Yeah. What is it? Can you share? What's your plan? Go ahead.
It's coral reefs and marine habitats.
Okay, I would suggest that you do not coral reefs, but why don't you do marine protected areas? Because that's a broader topic. It includes coral reefs, but it also includes other things. And so there's lots of literature on marine protected areas. It works from an economic and a management point of view. And it sort of gets you out of the narrow focus on coral reefs to a little bit broader thing. So, that'll let you talk about coral reefs, but it's not only that. All right. Okay. All right. I'm going to go now. I think I got one more group I'll visit. All right. Okay, so everybody's back together. Breakout rooms are all closing. Looks like one by one they're closing. All right, I'm going to go around. See how many people are here. 37. It's a little hard to tell if people are still in their rooms or if they're coming out. All right, looks like everybody's out of their rooms. So I'm going to go down the list, and when I call your name, you know, you should have a spokesperson who's appointed to give your topic, and go ahead and tell us, you know, what you're doing, and be prepared to, you know, answer a few questions about where you're going with this milestone 1. Okay, let's start with Cabbage Patch. Cabbage Patch. Who's the spokesperson for Cabbage Patch, and what are you thinking about? You might be muted, Cabbage Patch.
Okay.
I get
Sorry, we hadn't quite locked down the spokesperson, but
okay.
Our outline so far is to do, okay, so our topic is the biodiversity and endangered species, and then we wanted to concentrate that more into the conservation of endangered species throughout Florida.
Okay.
So we were going to break it down for two, let me go back over. Oh, okay. 3 species, 1 plant and 2 animal, like the Florida panther, the gopher tortoise, and then our ideas are either like the ghost orchid and mangroves, or other things that we're still researching into what we can find the most media on.
Okay, good. All right, so I mean, you can approach this because there'll be scientific literature on all these different species. There'll also be public discussion of, you know, protecting these species. We can talk about Endangered Species Act, so that, you know, you can be broad in terms of both having scientific results to present and then also sort of more management and societal kind of things. All right, thanks very much. Homeboys. Okay, have you got a spokesperson? I guess I should have asked you to appoint a spokesperson, but somebody decide and speak for the homeboys.
Yes, so we want to do the topic of microplastics, and we want to specifically focus on what are microplastics, like what do they start as and how do they end up being microplastics, and why are they harmful to have.
Okay, so that would be microplastics in the ocean or in aquatic?
Yes, in the ocean, yes.
Okay, aquatic systems, because it's not just oceans, of course.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's, you know, that's been a popular topic. I've had students in a lot of my classes.
So that's why we kind of wanted to focus on more of how they become microplastics and all of the process of from trash being in the ocean to transforming into minute particles and all that.
Okay, so you'd also have to talk about, you know, what is a plastic and what plastics are more susceptible, what the sources of these plastics are, you know, how they end up move through the ecosystem, that kind of thing. Okay, all right, great. Well, what about the Planeteers? What do the Planeteers want to do?
We want to do anthropogenic impacts on coral reefs in Florida specifically.
Okay.
Or the Gulf, I guess.
And you're going to focus on Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so there's some ways that you can focus in on that. So there's, you know, how do we protect coral reefs, climate impacts on coral reefs, coral bleaching, you know, so there's a lot of specific areas that you can look at. So when you're developing your milestone, you want to start looking at the literature and trying to get a sense of, you know, where there are specific sort of scientific studies that will speak to your question.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right, great. All right, so next up is the Big Lean Green Machine. So What do you got, Green Machine? Somebody might be muted. Checking that you're not muted.
No.
Okay.
So our topic is going to be coastal management and sea level rise, specifically focused on the north and south coasts of Florida. And we're just going to talk about how barrier islands and mangroves and things like that help protect our coasts. And then we're going to talk about zoning codes and how building things is determined.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's like I said, when I was in your session there, that's a good topic in terms of, you can get into the science of sea level rise and then the management aspects of how do we cope with that. Okay, great. Moving along, next up is the Turtle Protection Squad. So turtles, what do you got?
All right, so our project is going to be on the impact of plastics on marine life, specifically on sea turtles. And some of the topics we can include are what kind of plastics are the worst for sea turtles, what products are the worst for them, and also some alternatives that we can use to plastics.
Okay, so you're going to have to negotiate with homeboys so that you're not overlapping too much, okay? So both of you want to do plastics, and you've got to focus on how this impacts a particular species. They were focusing on microplastics and the nature of that. So when you're going to have to, because you both chosen the same area, you need to negotiate with them and figure out how to distinguish the two topics so that the presentations don't totally overlap. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So take note, homeboys, that the turtle squad is also in your turf. So you need to figure out how to distinguish that. Okay. But no problem. All right. Moving along. Can't fathom. What does Can't Fathom want to do?
I think we're gonna do marine harmful algae blooms, specifically in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we're gonna focus on how those will affect marine life, public health, and the economy.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that you have quite a lot of stuff there. That's a good topic. You'll be able to find both scientific literature and societal stuff. Okay, thank you. Next up is Fantastic Ferns. Fantastic Ferns. What are you planning to do?
For our project, we wanted to research the effects of aquaculture in different communities. So we kind of wanted to keep it broad for just this first part because we didn't know if anyone else had an interest in aquaculture. But what we really wanted to do is to be able to analyze the efficacy of aquaculture, the economic effects, the environmental effects, how it affects fishing communities, and how to be more sustainable with aquaculture.
Okay, great. Yeah, that is a good topic. It's certainly something that's relevant, and there's scientific literature, there's economic questions, and there's also sort of management, because and it's also locally relevant because there are a lot of farms, catfish farms, tilapia farms in Mississippi in particular. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ferns. Next up, bad beaches. What does bad beaches have to tell us?
So we were going to do the endangerment of Asian elephants. And we were going to focus on the main contributors to their endangerment. So habitat loss, deforestation, conflict with humans, and agricultural development.
Okay.
And then depending on, the constraints or whatnot of the assignment, we can go into the policy making, protecting them, and how to improve it.
Okay, so you can also look at the sort of the ecology of elephants and how that's changed as the land use patterns have removed habitat for elephants and where they. So there's a lot to cover there. All right, great. All right, well, thank you, Beaches. Next up is wayfinders. What do the wayfinders want to
do? So we had a pretty similar topic to the cabbage patches,
and they went first. And so we kind of like hit the panic button and we're like, oh gosh, we can't do endangered species in Florida because they're going to do that. But what we had talked about in our breakout room was one of the endangered species we were going to look at was going to be bees. So now we're going to like focus our whole paper on bees, and specifically like the fact that they're an endangered species, and looking at in the state of Florida, since we're a highly agricultural and horticultural dependent, state for our economy, like the impact that bees have on that for us. So our paper is not only going to focus on like the benefits to the environment that bees give us, but also, our economy and, things like that. So it's going to be a very well-balanced paper, appealing to maybe some people that don't always, like to think about the bees.
Okay, Babs. I would suggest that you broaden it a little bit and also look at just sort of the general question of pollinators.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
And think about, not just bees, but what are the natural pollinators? You know that bees are not native to the North America, that bees were imported, honeybees, from Europe. And so that completely altered the way in which pollination happens. And that, so that, a lot of the native pollinators were outcompeted by bees. And so I think if you do that and think about, and then there are many other things that pollinate, like bats, for example, are great pollinators. And so there's a lot more.
Okay, great, yeah.
Bees are great, but so I think, pollinators and management of pollinators, if you would broaden it a little bit, you could still talk about bees, but you could have, more science and more, things.
No, yeah, that sounds awesome. Thank you for the suggestion.
Okay, great. All right, next up is only clams. Only clams. What do you got? Calling the clams. Calling clams. Only clams.
Hey, sorry about that. So what we ended up deciding on is, since we're gonna end up doing overfishing, just so that way we don't because we were gonna do microplastics as well, but since we've already got, I think, 2 groups already doing it, I think we decided to switch it last minute. And so we're going to do overfishing and how that affects populations of fish, and then the ecosystems where those fish reside, and also the human responses to overfishing and how we're either trying to combat it or how they're going to exploit it.
That's a great topic, and I think you'll find lots on that. And you can approach it from a bunch of different ways. There's a lot of sort of mathematical stuff about, managing fishes and sustainable yield, optimum yield. And there's also a lot of societal stuff about how do we, fishing groups and, the different fishing organizations worldwide. So I think you'll get lots of material there, and you'll have a good topic to present.
All right, awesome.
Great. Okay, next up is only clams. Beach, please. Beach, please. What do you got, Beach, please?
We were going to do the melting of polar ice caps and how that affects sea level rise and Earth's albedo.
Okay, great. Lots to do there. All right, well, that's a well-chosen topic. You'll find, lots of material on that. And I think that's a good one. All right, so Beach Please is doing melting of sea ice, polar ice. Are you going to consider the sort of the changes in the cryosphere, or are you going to focus on a particular area, or don't you know yet?
Not sure yet.
Okay, because you could look at just the polar ice and in the Arctic. You could also look at the ice sheets and glaciers everywhere. So you can be broad or narrow. But it seems like so far anyway, you've got the topic to yourself. And so I think that gives you a lot of scope to refine where you want to go. Okay, great. Next up, we got a few minutes, so we got to move ahead. Is Aquanauts. Aquanauts, can you briefly tell me what you're up to?
So the Aquanauts would also like to do plastics and their effect on our water systems.
Right.
This is going to be different from the other 2 groups because we're going to focus more on plastics at large by the way that they leach chemicals into our aquifers and our drinking water and our food systems. So focusing less on like microplastics and species.
Okay, so you're going to have to get with the homeboys, and who else was doing microplastics?
The Turtle Squad, and if any of them want to hop on, I believe that the homeboys were doing microplastics and like the whole process of how that happens, and the Turtle Squad said that they're doing the effects of microplastics on
No,
species.
we weren't doing microplastics at all. We were just doing plastics on turtles specifically.
So they could be like the biology, biodiversity, ecology part of plastics, and we could be like the human food system and water system. And
Right, and for the turtles, you know that Mariana Fuentes, Professor Fuentes here at, has got a whole study. You know, that's one of the major research areas, and so you could get a lot of results from her. Okay, I need to.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me keep going because we're almost out of time. Aquanauts, aquatic junkies. What do you got?
We're gonna do permafrost in the Arctic. So like the melting of permafrost.
Melting of the permafrost. That's different from melting of sea ice because you're specifically talking about soils that are melting, and then the release of greenhouse gases. Okay, great, Penelope. Thank you. Just a few left. So Tiktaalik, what do you got, Tiktaalik?
Hello. So we were also going to do coastal management and sea level rise in Florida as the other group was, but now that they're doing that, we might focus mainly on Miami or perhaps a different state altogether. But we were thinking about either doing the physical aspects of it, like the erosion and degradation, rebuilding of straits, and how that can affect just like the geological process of the area, or maybe do something a little more like within social groups and how certain people will be disproportionately affected, and also the insurance world. We talked about that as well, just how they're going to start financing these like a large movement of people out of coastal areas in Miami in particular.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can, yeah, well that, you know, you'll negotiate then with the two groups and try to keep the two topics distinct.
Our group is going to talk over the weekend, and we might come up with something completely different altogether, but this is what we had for today.
Okay, good enough. All right, we got one more group to do. We're just a little bit over, and the final would be team title. So team title, what do you got?
So originally we were going to do coral reefs in marine environments, but now we're going to do marine protected areas and focus on the different like natural values of marine protected areas, like the different ecosystems and how that all plays into planning for marine protected areas.
Okay, and as I said, there's a lot of literature on MPAs, and you know, you can talk about different examples. There are lots of good visuals, and so that's a good topic, and you'll have plenty to do there. And you can also talk about coral reefs a little bit because some of the marine protected areas are coral reefs. Yeah. And likewise, the folks doing coral reefs can think about marine protected areas as a way to defend coral reefs. All right. Okay, everybody. I think we've gotten through all. Aquatic junkies. I forgot to write down your topic. Can you tell me real quickly one more time what that is? Anybody from Aquatic Junkies?
Yeah, the melting of Arctic permafrost.
Okay, melting of permafrost. Yeah, okay, thanks. I remembered, but I've got everything written down here. All right, great. All right, well, that's it for today. If you have questions about any of this, Carrie or I are both available. And otherwise, over the weekend, you have the team essays that you have to do, and then also the milestone 1 material. And then there'll be a reading quiz. So lots of stuff to do. Have a good weekend, everybody. And I'll hang on for a little bit if there's anybody who wants to ask questions. But everybody else is free to leave if you're done.
Hi,
Hi, Professor McDonald. Could you repeat the name of the professor that's doing a lot of research on turtles?
Mariana Fuentes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That was
Thank you
what I was
so
gonna
much.
ask. Cool.
Have a good weekend.
Okay, you too. Anybody else with questions?
Thank you.
Carrie, are you still around?
I'm here.
Okay. So were you able to get to the different rooms? I couldn't tell how that was working. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, when you
I'm
move,
just sort of like grabbing you and sticking you in another room, and I can't. You might be in the middle of a sentence or something. So
no, I mean, that worked.
it does work.
If
Okay.
that's what we're gonna have to do, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's sort of trying to keep a lot of balls in the air because I have to like go into one room and then get out and put you in another room and figure out. So it creates a little bit more bother than I would like, but maybe we can figure out how to let you move around.
Yeah, I'll keep looking for a solution to that.
Okay. And so you're driving back soon, or what's your?
Yeah, I should be back Monday night.
Monday night. Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, drive safely. Watch out for that weekend traffic and all that. And
Yeah.
let me know when you get back.
I will.
Okay. All right. Goodbye, everybody. I'm going to end the class now. And